I've but come from the last wine shop open. Ishtar's curse on these white-livered reformers who close the grog houses. Let men sleep rather than guzzle, they say. Aye, so they can work and fight better for their masters. Soft-gutted eunuchs, I call them. When I served with the mercenaries of Corinthia, we swilled and wenched all night and fought all day. Aye, blood ran down the channels of our swords.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Grog House podcast. We're doing another episode here. I'm here, as always, with Josh.
Hello.
And today, we're going to be taking a look at all of the currently published, as far as we're both aware, comic book adaptations of some of the Robert E. Howard stories I've done scripted reviews on the channel.
Mm-hmm.
We thought that would be a fun thing to do, and we're starting with the Tower of the Elephant, which was Josh's suggestion. So why did you pick this story out of any of the other ones to do first?
I think for me, it was just because it's my favorite of the ones I've read thus far. Of the pulps that Howard wrote. But I think also just because it's a very pure kind of story that I think really captures the kind of escapist feeling of Conan. And I think it's very timeless in that way. So I figured it'd be fun to, and it's just such a simple story. So I felt like it'd be a fun thing to try and dissect kind of different tries at adapting it because it is such a simple story. And I think that, like, as we'll see, each one has something very distinct kind of about it, and I think that that's really cool to kind of see what's going on there.
Definitely. I'm really glad you picked this one because Tower of the Elephant's one of my favorite stories too.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably my favorite of those, early Howard Conan stories because it's got kind of like the classic status quo where he's like a young warrior thief man. He's not like the old King Conan thing that you got going on in the first two stories that were published. So I think this is a good place as any to start. So which issues did we take a look at, Josh? Do you have the list in front of you, or if not, I can say them.
Yeah, so we have issue 4 of the Marvel Conan's books, which is it has Barry Windsor Smith illustrating it and Roy Thomas writing it, as per usual for Roy Thomas to write these. And then Savage Sword of Conan, the magazine, that's the 24th issue of that, which is where Buscema illustrates it. And then we have the Dark Horse Conan series, which is written by Kier Busiek and illustrated by Kerry Nord. And that is issue 20 to 22, which is probably the one that's the most lengthy, and it's the one that's like serialized, which is very different from the other ones, obviously.
Yeah, it's really interesting. to see this story kind of presented in three very different lengths. Obviously,
Yeah.
the standard 22 page adaptation from the original Conan book that started in 1970 that Barry Windsor Smith drew. That's just like a one and done single issue story. The Savage Sword one is, I think, double the length, and it's basically like a illustrated novel, sort of like it's just kind of constant like thought narrations about the things that Howard writes about in the prose, which I thought was really cool.
Mhm.
And then the Dark Horse one is sort of like the Buscema Savage Sword one, but it's just a little bit longer, and they take their time and revel a little bit more in some of the like cool visual stuff that's in this, which is really cool as well.
Yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it, but I remember we were initially DMing each other about this. I said that Buscema's elephant, his rendition of the Elephant Man, was my favorite, but after reading the Busiek one, I gotta say, the way that they visualize and really linger on the elephant is really haunting and really very effective in what it's trying to communicate.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think I'm with you. It's between Nord's visual take on the Elephant Man and Buscema for me as well.
Yeah.
I really like the flashback scenes that Nord gets to draw, like the full page spreads of the winged elephants flying around and some of the.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it looks
Yeah.
amazing.
It looks wonderful.
Yeah. So let's hop right into it. So, which of these would you say is your favorite? It's hard for me to choose myself, but I think I landed on one by the end of reading all three of them.
I'm gonna say Bishama. Just because I feel like he's kind of like it's a very definitive kind of like take on it, I think, and I think that kind of what Windsor Smith and Bishama both do with it is very much I like how they're both very cinematic about it, and the way that they're illustrating that story, and but I think the Bishama's kind of cinematography, but that's probably the wrong like terminology for it, but or no, choreography, the way he choreographs the fights and the scenery is just so majestic and beautiful, and the elephant that he draws is so otherworldly and larger than life. It's a sight to behold. But I do really like Windsor Smith's rendition when it comes to the way Conan himself is illustrated. This is a younger Conan. I do like that Windsor Smith's Conan is smaller for this story. I think that's a really interesting kind of way to go about it, because traditionally Windsor Smith's Conan is a bit more slimmer, and I like that in this story a lot. But I think overall Buscema is probably my favorite between all the stories.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I like lots of things about all three of the renditions of this artistically, because I'm with you. I think Buscema's is my favorite just because it's sort of I think the best middle ground between making it too long, which not that the Dark Horse one drags or anything, but this story is very short and concise, and I think doing it in a single issue makes a lot of sense. And I think the increased page count gives Buscema and Thomas the ability to flesh out the story and the world that this takes place in much more than Windsor Smith gets to. I feel like Buscema gets to breathe a little bit more and show what this thief city really looks like and how grimy and dirty it is. And I think the Dark Horse adaptation does a good job with all that stuff too. But it's sort of like the opposite for me of what you said about the Windsor Smith rendition. I really like the atmosphere and the world and the way everything looks. And Conan, for me, in that one, it really depends on the page as to whether or not I think he looks good. Like there are some scenes when he's in the courtyard, like fighting the lions
Mm-hmm.
and stuff, and it just looks a little rushed, and
Mm.
kind of, I don't know. It's not to my artistic taste. Like Conan looks a little jagged and stuff like that, which isn't a problem in some of the other panels. Like I think he especially the scene at the beginning in the bar, Conan looks really like ominous because it looks like his face is lit from underneath him like a monster or something, which I think that's the right way to portray Conan as sort of like a scary, monstrous character, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can agree with that for sure.
So yeah, I mean, I probably like the the Dark Horse like look of the world this takes place in the most, just because it gets to be in color and it's got modern coloring and all of that kind of stuff. But Buscema
Yeah.
always does a great job, even with like the cross hatching and the shadowing in these Savage Sword books. It looks amazing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and he's kind of the king at balancing um that kind of like traditional comic booky kind of Marvel House look while also being very naturalistic, you know.
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of him in general, Buscema, from like his Silver Surfer work and now his Thor, because I'm reading a lot of Thor now, and Buscema's Thor is really really good. But yeah, no, but Conan, and you can tell that he loves that character, and the way that he just illustrates him.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I guess maybe for some of our viewers that don't know, the people who worked on the first two Marvel adaptations are kind of comic book legends and titans. Of course, you got Roy Thomas, who is of, you know, the Avengers and many other comic books at Marvel fame. He co-created the Vision amongst some of the other Avengers characters, so he's a big deal. And
Yeah.
of course, his run on Conan is also legendary. But he got to work with Barry Windsor Smith, who is the guy that wrote and drew Weapon X, amongst other Wolverine and X-Men stories that became classics. And you also got Buscema, who is a legend in his own right. We've kind of talked about this in DMs before, but I kind of view Windsor Smith and Buscema as kind of like the Steve Ditko and John Romita for Conan. Like, the Ditko was the creator of Spider-Man, and he kind of defined the lanky, awkward look for the character. And then you have Romita come on later, and everything looks a bit more clean and
Oh, sure.
uh, just the way they're drawn. I don't mean like the world looks clean and happy and stuff suddenly, but just the line
Yeah.
work, and I like them both almost equally. I do like Buscema a little bit more, but Windsor
Yeah.
Smith is also great.
For sure, yeah. I definitely think that comparison is very apt, because also with Romita's Spider-Man, that's the Spider-Man that everybody knows for the most part, and that's kind of the Spider-Man that's a lot kind of like, it's very presentable, and people are like, oh yeah, like that's Spider-Man,
Yes.
That's definitely the way that Buscema's Conan is that it's the kind of really define the look of that character, and everyone kind of goes to that, either Buscema or Frank Frazetta, for like, oh yeah, like this is how Conan's supposed to look. It's cool. It's cool to see that.
Absolutely. And you can tell Buscema specifically is looking at some of the Frazetta stuff when he's doing his work on Conan, because he's got a similar
Sure.
kind of haircut and the kind of, bangs, long hair kind of look for the character is the way to draw him now. Like that's recognizably Conan to most people, which is cool.
Yeah, I can see why he went on to do Tarzan as well after illustrating Conan, just because of the way that the character is kind of positioned in Buscema's run.
Absolutely. And, Conan does also fight his fair share of giant ape monsters in these stories. So,
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
um,
Um,
so sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, how do you feel about the thieves that Conan partners himself with in this story, like between each of the adaptations. Because I feel like I have a favorite, but I was wondering which one is your favorite between these three adaptations.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up because that's one of the things I wanted to talk about as well. That I noticed that was sort of
Yeah,
funny. Um, I like the Dark Horse one the most because it's the most accurate to the book.
I agree.
But I do know why Buscema would go for a more lean, muscular guy for a professional thief rather than a giant fat guy like he is in the pros, because that just makes more sense, you know.
Yeah, for sure. No,
So
I agree.
so some of those like little adaptation things, you can see where like the authors and artists wanted to kind of improve the story a little bit, but um, yeah, I didn't think the Buscema version was bad or anything. I just thought that was funny, and I'm like, oh yeah, it is. I didn't think of it that way before. I'm like, oh yeah, this like giant fat guy is supposed to be like stealthy and like able to jump around and do stuff.
For sure, yeah. Something I really like about the Dark Horse one is that he's and something I like about the original prose is that there is something kind of like jocular about the character about Conan's companion in this.
Hmm.
He kind of is very enthusiastic, and that kind of complements Conan's more kind of not as like enthusiastic kind of demeanor, which I think is interesting. And I just like that kind of contrast. He's just a very fun character in the Dark Horse one. Not that he isn't fun in the other two versions, but I think that his design and the way he positions himself kind of opens him up more to that kind of characterization of the Dark Horse one.
I agree. I I do like that he's sort of the Robin to Conan's Batman in this. Like he's like cracking jokes and like, "Ha, I killed all these lions with this powder," and all this stuff. And Conan's like, "What?"
Yeah, for sure.
That all that stuff was great. And I also like
Hmm.
that in keeping with his background as a thief. I mean, this is the thing in the prose too, but I liked that he puts on that kind of like happy-go-lucky demeanor. He gets Conan to help him get up to the top, and then he like is going to seemingly betray him before he's killed by the giant spider monster. I was like, oh, of course.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what did you like as far as which of these is the best sort of story adaptation in terms of like hitting on the themes of the story, covering all of the best moments from the story, portraying them in an exciting way? Which of them do you think does that the best?
I think that the Dark Horse one probably gets more at I think the overall kind of like the themes and ideas of the story probably more in a lot of ways because it just has more time to elaborate and to dive into stuff, which I like. You know, I really like that we get more elaboration on the thief kind of. We get a conversation between the thief and Conan about why he doesn't throw the body over the bushes and
Hmm.
stuff like that, which I really like. And I think that kind of contrast between the emotional and I think kind of the mindfulness versus the kind of physical strength and imposing strength, I think is very important to the story. So it's cool to have that moment to kind of, string that along to the point where we get Conan interacting with the elephant and him feeling really sad about all that stuff and ultimately making that choice with Yara.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think the Dark Horse one is the one that gets the absolute closest. Not that
Yeah.
any of them are particularly unfaithful. the original Marvel adaptation that's just like 22 or whatever pages long has to like cut some things and rearrange things. And the Buscema one is pretty close, but it does change some things like we mentioned, such as, you know, the thief not being a, you know, Santa Claus type character.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, probably the Dark Horse one for me too. But the original Marvel one also has some of the closest actual, like, I guess, narrations in those narration boxes. Like, a lot of that is just taken directly from the book with very few alterations. The Dark Horse one has some of that too, but they rely a little bit more on the visual storytelling. The Savage Sword book is very much, you can tell, like, in the style of the old 60s and 70s Marvel books, where a panel would suffice with nothing in it, but you do get kind of like a narration or something like that. It's not as bad as some of the early Stan Lee stuff, where it's just like the character talking about the things that are being drawn, and you're like, yeah, Stan, I get it. I have eyes, thanks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But,
Yeah, well, something we definitely have to talk about with the two Marvel adaptations, which does remain consistent with the Dark Horse one, is there's no sound effects, which is interesting, you know.
very true.
And there's no like flop balloons and stuff like that with these. Just something that's worth mentioning, just because of how uncommon that was at the time, and just how, like, conscious of a choice that was to make this distinct from everything else, which is cool. And then I think it really hones in on the fact that, you know, they're trying to go for something more kind of like visceral, you know, and I think that it's something that's true to the character in adapting him to this form, which is interesting.
I agree.
You know?
And I think that is a good choice on the part of the people making the choice to adapt this from the Howard prose, because you don't often get long diatribes in people's heads in Howard's Conan short stories, just because he doesn't have time. But he does, you know, still describe the emotions the characters had, but it's more from like a third person, more distant perspective, I guess. And most of the narration is, you know, that describes Conan's state of mind or what he's thinking or whatever it is like that. It's just kind of like, and then Conan thought this to himself, but it doesn't show him kind of like Spider-Man-y reasoning in his head, like, oh, you know, what should I do? That sort of thing.
Yeah, no, just because that's not the kind of character that Conan is. He's a man of very, very few words, and a lot of his kind of a lot of the way that he internalizes things is very unique, and the kind of positions that he's in his stories, you know. You know, and even though he also isn't someone that shows a ton of emotion, he does subtly show it in other ways through the visuals, which I think, you know, showing that through the kind of unique kind of narration in those stories, you know, it's just a really cool way to tell the narrative, you know, of Conan through comic books.
Definitely. And that's one of the things that really struck me when I started reading these stories, is just how perfect they were, and how suited they were for adaptation into the comic book medium. I mean, you have like these short stories that have an incredible amount of rich description in them for visuals, and a character that's a man of action, like you said, rather than words. I mean, that's just like perfect for a superhero-y type comic book. I mean, Conan's not a superhero, but you can see why people who were making the premier superhero books at the time in the 70s, this character interested them, you know?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Well, and I think it's also like you can tell why maybe people who were reading comic books wanted to have a character like Conan, or a sword and sorcery book that felt like Conan, to you know, be one of the comic books they were reading on a monthly basis, you know. That I can totally see. because it just kind of speaks to those kinds of like escapist values, you know, of and you know they're a lot more kind of episodic, you know, which is
Yes.
interesting.
Hmm.
I think that's another thing that's really important is that you can kind of read Conan stories in kind of really any order. You know, like it's not like obviously like there's some stuff of continuity and just the world building and all that.
Right.
Um, but not so much in like each story is like a beginning, middle, and end. So you know, he's kind of really like a really good character to have for that, where it's like, oh yeah, like each issue you can just hop in, have fun with it, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that I like about these stories quite a bit. And also, you know, it makes a lot of sense why Oliver Stone, when he was, you know, writing his initial script drafts for that first Conan movie, he kind of envisioned it as a 24 film saga that had like a loose, or no, it was 12 films he was thinking. But it was like a loose string of sequels, sort of like James Bond, and he wanted Conan
Yeah.
to become the like sword and sorcery James Bond franchise hero. Like he would, you know, he was a character you could just keep telling stories with. You don't need to have seen the last one necessarily to see the current one that's out in theaters, whatever. Yeah, it's just a
Hmm.
very it's a very good set of stories for adaptation, and Tower of the Elephant especially, because you fit all these grand concepts like, you know, ancient aliens that have, you know, affected the
Yeah.
outcome of civilization's development and all these kind of things. It's really interesting.
Well, in the Marvel comics, I mean, like the Marvel Conan, like renditions of the Tower of the Elephant, the stuff with the elephants feel like something straight out of like Thor or
Yes.
something, or like another kind of like cosmic book or whatever, like or like Fantastic Four or something like that. Like it feels very like old school Marvel cosmic adventure stuff, you know, in the
Yeah,
way that it's delivered. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, it feels like this could be a Kirby book or something that he made up, you know, like, oh, you
Yeah.
know, because the Thor character has always been sort of a blend of science fiction and high fantasy in the Marvel universe. And Conan is that it leans much more into the fantasy, and especially like historically realistic fantasy, obviously. But
Oh, for sure.
I love that you know, in the Conan universe, you play with science fiction concepts like this.
Well, and I also like that, um, even though like obviously like the Elephant Man is an alien, he has like a perspective on history and starts kind of talking about history and talking about you know Atlantis, you know, and all this stuff and talking about but also like his place in history. So there's that element of it to ground it in this world, even though he himself is so out of place. And you can see the kind of nature of brutality in this world that, which I think kind of goes into the overall idea of you know just Conan in general. That's kind of a study of brutality and civilization, like civilized people versus like the barbaric people. You know that the instant that this elephant you know comes to presence or whatever, he's enslaved by this guy, you know,
Yeah,
Yara, and he is kind of just a means to an end for him, you know, and it's just a very harsh kind of historical reality with vengeance that serves as like a major kind of moment for the story and also for Conan's character to look at that, you know.
I agree with you. I mean, I think it's very tragic that the Elephant Man flees his planet as a war refugee. Him and his people are looking for refuge. They find Earth. People start to worship them as gods, and then, like you said, he's tricked by his student, and it turns out he naively was too trusting of humanity's good instincts. They too are willing to do the kind of things that his people were doing during, I'm sure during the war. I'm sure there had to have been some kind of slavery going on, if it was a war that cataclysmically brutal and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, all that stuff is really fascinating, and I really like the scene in the Buscema and Dark Horse adaptation where Conan is sort of walking around the city and thinking about the theme that you just mentioned about the civilized people versus barbaric people. And I think the central theme of a lot of the Conan stories is how exactly savage is Conan when people who are supposedly civilized are capable of all of these evil things, like things that are much eviler than the things Conan does. I mean, Conan is like a reaver who kills people, but he's not trying to enslave an alien race for power and be like an evil wizard.
Yeah, no, he's just trying to get by, basically. And I guess it's so telling that the first person that he talks to and has an interaction with in this story that kind of serves as the introduction to this story and to him going on this journey is a man who sells women. That's his livelihood. And he, by the end of the story, kills a guy who kept it's actually Yara dies by the elephant man. But he causes that guy's death, I think that's really interesting, that he kind of goes on this path and kind of proves himself a better person ultimately than that guy, and it's just because it's that kind of comparison between those two people, it's that kind of barbaric nobility thing that's going on, which is interesting.
Exactly. I mean, in a time when Conan's the most noble person, I mean, that's also a troubling prospect, and that's
for sure.
That's why this dark fantasy world is so intriguing in the first place. I agree with you. Conan is perhaps the noblest character in the story, but he's also trying to steal a jewel because he's greedy, just like all the other people in the city, which is interesting. He's evil in some ways, but less evil than some of the other civilized people that are like mad with power or consumed by greed, like that guy in the bar was, for sure.
Oh, for sure. He's definitely a very self-serving character ultimately in many of the stories, and he isn't. He's very infallible, but I also think it's interesting that, like you said, and I totally agree with you that in comparison to those like other people, he is probably the most noblest kind of figure. And I think that just Conan's position in that world says something about himself as a person and everybody else as well. Just his presence in these stories, hopping into these situations, changes the reader's perception on everybody involved and who are these people. It's interesting.
Yeah,
how he has that effect.
Agreed. And that's one of the things that makes me very interested in Conan as a character in general. Like, he's not the archetypal hero. Like, there's a lot of archetypes in these stories. Like, the damsel in distress trope is all over these Conan stories. Some of them are more egregious than others. Like, there are some women in the stories that, despite being damsels in distress, like, they are, scrappy and brave and all those sorts of things. But the kind of like reaver, angry warrior archetype hadn't been done before this character in like high fantasy adventure fiction, and I think that's one of the things that makes him unique. Like, he's not Superman, who always has the right moral answer to every question by the end of the story, or that the challenge is for the character, like, oh, will the good man abandon his morals in this situation so desperate? It's like, no, like Conan will abandon any morals if the situation calls for it. He doesn't care. He just wants to survive.
Yeah. Although it's interesting because Siegel and Schuster are fans of weird tales,
That's awesome.
so it's possible that they were fans of Conan. But I digress. No, yeah, Conan kind of etched a kind of a new archetype, you know, and he's the best because he started that, and I think that the story really shows that, that he's a warrior, and just throwing him into kind of what you said, in the Phoenix and the Sword review. He kind of like it kind of just is like these like historical accounts of this like amazing and otherworldly man, who in history has gone around and done all these like wild things, and it's interesting seeing him in these just different situations. I think this story is a very good example of that, where it's just such a unique situation that probably happened a lot because of just how unique Conan is, as a character.
Yeah, it feels like some sort of like mythical legend, like the Odyssey or something. Like,
Yeah.
Odysseus goes on. I'm sure Odysseus, if he was a real person and the Trojan War was real and all that stuff, he encounters mythical creatures like sirens and stuff. Like, probably didn't happen in real life, but like maybe he actually did, go through the straits between the islands off the coast of Italy and the main peninsula, and had a treacherous journey, and a game of telephone ensued over thousands of years, and then it became like he fought these like sirens that tried to like kill everybody. It feels sort of like
yeah. It's mythical, and doing that, it allows kind of the people listening to grasp onto how intense those journeys must have been, even though they probably didn't happen exactly like that. They had to have been as emotionally intense as it was described, based on the way that like monsters are used, like living metaphors. Basically, it's interesting to think about Conan within that lens, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, you sort of made me think about with your point there. I really like the flashback scenes with the elephant that we were talking about earlier, where he's talking about the view of history he has. And it makes me think about how humanity, we know a lot about recent history, and a little bit about prior ages because of written records that we're not even sure are true all the way. You know what I mean? Like, you can't read the biographer of Alexander the Great's accounts of him and not think to yourself, I mean, this has to be a little biased, right? I mean, this is the guy that Alexander paid for to write his life story.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some element of propagandic myth making in that stuff, but the broad strokes we do have some historical evidence for and all that kind of stuff, but there's still a lot we don't know, and I, from a very young age, was kind of like my mind was always kind of blown by the idea that civilizations like ancient Egypt, I would read books about them, and the historians would talk about how there are gaps in the historical record that will never be recovered or figured out. Like, it's just a mystery lost to time. We don't know some lost Egyptian king, like there are Egyptian rulers that there's like mentions of them, but no other historical record we found relating to them. So like what they did during their lifetime is entirely a mystery to us. And the Elephant Man talks about some of the stuff that happened way before Conan was born, like the sinking of Atlantis and all of that kind of stuff. He's just been around to witness all of these things that humanity doesn't know about in its past. And this elephant could have shared this knowledge with humanity if it wasn't for his enslavement. I mean, it's very telling that Yara, like, his first instinct is to, oh, I'm gonna like enslave this guy and get his power. Like, I would have been nerding out, like, tell me everything that happened.
Yeah, it speaks a lot to the kind of the violent nature of humans in that regard, and how using people as a means to an end is so much more beneficial, and the easier choice than opening oneself up to knowledge, and getting a better understanding of an alien concept. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not confident that if an alien actually landed in like Roswell or something, that the first instinct of whichever government discovered it wouldn't be like, we must reverse engineer their technology and use it as weapons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure that like it would be more like, we gotta like figure out how this being works. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, both of those things would definitely happen. I just wonder, if they would be as cynical as the evil people in Howard's world. But I mean, we'll never know, because the Area 51 raid didn't go as planned. We were planning on knowing, but
Yeah, people wanted to do that, but it did not happen.
We should have shown up to the Area 51 raid dressed as Robert E. Howard characters. We may have succeeded.
Oh my god! Oh no, I would never. That's funny though.
Imagine just like Naruto running as Conan towards Area 51.
Oh my god! No, that'd be crazy.
Yeah. So. No, the story is just wonderful. I mean, I could talk about it all day. And the adaptations, I think we would highly recommend all three of them, I would say. I mean, I definitely
for sure, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think each of them has something interesting and different to offer about the stories. I think each of them has like a very distinct art style, so it just depends on your taste, and I would recommend giving each of them a shot, because you're bound to love at least one of them, if not all of them. They're all really good.
Yeah, so that actually brings up a very good question that I think might be interesting for people that want to introduce other people to Conan, and maybe for us that want to introduce people to him. Which of these would you give a person who has never read a Conan story before as their introduction? Would it be the Buscema one, the Barry Windsor Smith one, or the Cary Nord adaptation?
Ooh, that's hard. That's hard, because I think they all kind of read similarly, because they're adapting the same source material, which is interesting. So I would say Buscema, just because that has like the kind of iconic, like, this is like how Conan like looks to a lot of people kind of a thing going on. And also because it just kind of feels right to me. That's how I got into Conan, basically, through the books, through the comic books, and Buscema was illustrating it, so I'd probably just pass it down like that. But I think the Dark Horse one is a bit more modern and contemporary in the way it's colored, which I think might be more attractive to people. It's a hard question, to consider. And also, they are different in the way they are written because of the time periods, but I do think there is a little bit of similarity because they're drawing from the same kind of source, So it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think the Dark Horse one is probably the one I would give to someone just because it's a little less wordy than the Savage Sword one. I love old Marvel comics, but There are many people I know, and I had this to some degree when I got into the Silver Age Marvel stuff, to be honest, until it kind of clicked with me as I read more of it. It's kind of hard to get into some of those older comics because how wordy they can be if you're a new comic book reader. So maybe if you're giving this to someone that's not a huge comic book person, I think the Dark Horse one is just a little bit more visual in terms of like less words to read and easier to follow in terms of that aspect of it, I suppose. And also your point about it just being like more modern art. I mean, the book is beautiful, so all of them are beautiful, but like,
oh yeah,
the modern one may be less kind of like, I guess, comic booky for people that aren't huge comic book fans. But if you're a big comic book fan, I think you can pick up any of these pretty easily. And Loki fangirls should definitely read the Barry Windsor Smith one, because Conan has this cool little mini Loki helmet on it, and it's awesome.
Yeah, no, he looks great with it. It's fun. Yeah, and also the new one, because I lament not talking too much about the art on the new one. It almost looks hand painted at points. Like the coloring, it looks gorgeous.
Yeah, the coloring on all of the Dark Horse Conan books is fabulous.
Yeah,
I'm really impressed every time I look at one of their adaptations. They were really killing it with this stuff in the early 2000s. You can tell, why Dark Horse became the home for licensed books, because they didn't just like crap out a product. I mean, they got Kurt Busiek, after all, to be the writer. I mean, Busiek is the best. I really like his work. He's famous for a bunch of things, but it's interesting that two of the guys that are kind of legends for writing the Avengers are like two of the most prominent Conan comic book writers.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah. So I think we covered this pretty thoroughly. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we leave it off?
Oh yeah, the giant spider is awesome.
Oh, true. Yeah,
for sure.
We forgot to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like the giant spider in I think all of them. I don't think that it's kind of hard to do a giant spider that I will never like that I don't like, It just looks awesome, I think that I really like the Kerbusic one because of just how like imposing the giant spider is. It looks really cool, and yeah, the Buscema one also looks cool as well. A little bit more detail, which is interesting.
Yeah.
What was your giant spider? Favorite giant spider?
My favorite giant spider was the Buscema one.
Yeah.
And it made me think. I may be just totally being a tinfoil hat wearing Alex Jones when I thought of this, but I was thinking when I was reading it, the way Buscema draws the spider and the way Conan fights it in that really reminded me of the first boss fight in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, where you have that like spider Goma monster that like climbs on the ceiling and like jumps down at you and stuff. I was like, this looks exactly like that. And not like the way the spider looks necessarily, but like the way it like leaps at Conan and like slowly crawls up the wall and stuff. And then I remembered in the trailers for Ocarina of Time, they used the Riders of Doom theme from the Conan soundtrack when they were like advertising that game. And I was like, I wonder if Miyamoto likes Conan. That'd be pretty awesome.
Oh my god, that's crazy. I totally forgot about that stuff, and I didn't even know about the trailers using that music. That's crazy.
Oh yeah. They even reused that theme when they did the 3DS remake. They put out a trailer that had the Riders of Doom like the old trailer, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever.
That's insane. God, that's so cool. Maybe I gotta start playing Zelda games now, because that's awesome that they were thinking about that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. But yeah, no, the giant spiders. That whole fight is, again, very well choreographed. And well thought out. I like that the spider has like an internal logic in the way that it hides, and a very clear strategy in how to fight Conan, and Conan has to kind of be creative in the way that he solves that situation. It's really cool.
Yeah. He you get a good sense that he's about to die in pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
But more so in the ones that can do the more adult stuff, like in Savage Sword and the Dark Horse one. But speaking of that, I just remembered something we didn't mention yet. One of the things that I criticized in the prose was how Yara's like not really in the story much until the end.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really liked the Barry Windsor Smith adaptation because it adds a scene where Conan kind of like sees Yara out in the courtyard and he's like talking to a guard, so you get like a little bit of an insight into his personality before you have Conan kill him at the end, and I think that's actually a really good addition. Like, I think even the pros could have used a scene like that.
Oh, I agree. I think that in that, and also in the Dark Horse one, the thief, or I think it's the thief. I might be wrong, but he kind of recalls the history and all that of what's going on with Yara, and you get to see Yara's kind of very cruel demeanor within the world, you know. So I thought that stuff was really good. I also really liked that the last issue was like building to that last scene with Yara. So no, I think in the Windsor Smith one and in the and then the Dark Horse adaptation, they've kind of noticed that as well, and they've elaborated further on his character, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So yeah, I mean that's all of the things that I had kind of like thought about going into the video. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you wanted to mention?
No, I feel pretty good about this discussion and what we were able to pick apart and talk about.
Yeah, we covered a lot of stuff, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, this was an awesome conversation. I think the episode went really well, and
Yeah,
I'm so glad that you suggested this. And thank you, as always, for joining me, Josh. You're the best co-host around, and
thank
I
you.
very much appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime, it's fun to do these things.
Absolutely. So we have not made a decision as to what comic book adaptation we're going to do next, but maybe we can hash it out live and in person for the audience because that will be
Oh,
extremely interesting.
it'll be
Sure.
interesting.
Yeah. So which story do you think you'd like to go to next? I mean, we don't have to do them in any particular order. So I'm down for whatever. Up to this point of this recording, I've completed the Iron Shadows in the Moon review. Queen of the Black Coast is next, so we could probably pick that and record it after I do the video on that, which would be in like a week or two. But if you want to do one in the intervening time, we can choose one of those. Does anyone jump to mind for you?
Oh God. Uh, it's the one with the giant ape, the rogues.
Rogues in the House?
Yes, yeah, rogues in the house. We should. That would be cool to do that.
Rogues in the House is a great idea because that's also one of my favorite Conan stories. That's a great one.
Yeah.
So I'll look up all of the comic book adaptations and we'll do a sort of comparison discussion on Rogues in the House next time.
Yep.
I'm going to have to see if Ablaze Comics has done an adaptation because I told you about this before, but like for listeners that don't know about this, there's this obscure comic book company that is doing adaptations, pretty good ones too, of the Howard Conan stories that are in the public domain. They're all either 2 or 3 issue miniseries. So I'm going to see if they did a Rogues in the House one, but if not, we'll just do the Marvel and Dark Horse ones and save the Ablaze ones for another time. But if people haven't looked at those, they're pretty interesting. They are more willing to take some creative liberties than the Dark Horse and Marvel ones I've noticed. So when we get to those, it'll be interesting to see, if we like a lot of those changes or not. Like I went through the Frost Giant's Daughter one pretty thoroughly, and that one is much expanded upon because the story is only like 3,000 words. So to get it to
Yeah.
be a 3-issue story, they had to add some stuff, which is kind of cool.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I've seen some of that art, and it looks really, really cool for sure. So I am definitely more than happy to check that out, and hopefully they have an adaptation.
Yeah. I would say people can check all of those Ablaze comic adaptations out on Amazon, Comixology, but that's ruined.
Interesting. I don't know too much about that whole situation with Comixology.
Dude, I bought like the entire Epic Collection library that they had on there that Marvel has put up so far for Conan.
Oh,
So
wow.
I had like pretty much all the Dark Horse stuff and like half of the original Marvel stuff. And I bought a bunch of the Savage Sword issues too. And then they got rid of the Comixology reader and integrated it into the Kindle reader. So there's no zoom function. There's no guided view function where you go panel to panel. It's just like 2 pages stuck like you're reading a text page, and the only function you can do is turn pages now. It's ridiculous.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, I'm reading that stuff physically, so I don't have to deal with that. But that is unfortunate. I hope that they address that very soon.
Yeah.
Because digital comics are really cool to read because you can zoom in and out, and I think some of them have like an interactive component where like you can tap on the screen and it goes panel by panel and all that stuff.
Yeah, Comixology used to do all that stuff, but now it's gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, I hope that they address that because that's a bummer.
Yeah, me too, because like I normally at the end of the show would have said to people, hey, like check out these issues on Comixology because they're easy to get there. You can get like high quality, reprints of this stuff. But now you're gonna now.
I heard.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I heard from Austin who was on our episode the commentary for Conan. He told us that on I think the mobile app you can still do it panel by panel. I think.
Yes, you can. My problem seems to be just a desktop issue at this point.
Yeah.
And I read all that stuff on my desktop so I can like take panel grabs for videos. That's why I was disappointed, but I had to go elsewhere to find them. Which
Yeah, that's fair.
we will not disclose where I went, but Anyway, we digress.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
All right, so thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for being here, Josh. And next time we'll see you for Rogues in the House.
Yeah, man.
See you guys later.
See ya.